Good evening, and welcome to this special celebration of our friend and neighbor, Stephen Hyler. I'm Matt Storen, the board president of the Camden Conference, and we're delighted to sponsor this event. It's such a big event, I'm wearing socks for the first time all summer. Stephen is a great friend of the Camden Conference, and whenever we've done anything about or on India, he's been a terrific resource for us, so we're glad to be sponsoring this event tonight. I also want to thank my right arm, Kim Scott, who's the executive director of the Camden Conference. And also the staff of the Rockport Opera House, which really means my friend Paul Desaulnier. He personally put all these 240 chairs up this afternoon. We also want to salute Barn Swallow Books, which is here to sell books for Stephen. They're located right below me here. And as I recall, you can buy the book here and then get it signed downstairs at the reception afterwards. So we're here to celebrate Stephen's memoir, Transformed by India, A Life. It's a chronicle of his immersion in Indian culture and history, which began basically on his 20th birthday when he rode a bicycle rickshaw across the border into India in 1971. We know that he is just among a handful of Western scholars universally recognized by Indians in all parts of the country. It's a rare and particular honor for him to be known that way. And tonight, through remarkable images, he will take us on a terrific journey reflecting his life in India. So please welcome our friend and neighbor, Stephen Hyler.
Thank you, Matt, and Kim, and Paul. Paul is amazing. Literally putting all these chairs up, and he has to take them down tonight because there's yoga in this space tomorrow morning. I wanted to be in the Rockport Opera House because this is all about community. My work is about community, and you are my community. And to be able, oh dear, I don't want to start off being teary, but to be able to release this memoir in my community is more meaningful than I can express. So thank you all, and also to Barn Swallow. Barn Swallow is such a wonderful bookstore, just a wonderful bookstore. So, and for all of you for being here. And today is Ganesh Chaturthi, and Ganesh Chaturthi is the one day of the year in the Hindu cosmogony in which the god, elephant-headed god Ganesha, is worshipped as the Lord of beginnings. Today it's beginning. And I did not know that today was, because it changes every year, it's a lunar calendar, I didn't know until this afternoon that today is Ganesh Chaturthi. So there's an aspect of serendipity that is just quite wonderful. And I just want to stress, to talk, that it really is about community. And if this would work, but it's also about and founded in my relationship with Helene Wheeler-Hyler, who has been part of my life since we were 16. And she is in many ways the core of my existence. I am the luckiest of men in many, many ways. It's about being here. It's about being in the mid-coast. It's about the way, when I talk to people and they say, why do you live in mid-coast Maine? I say, it's because community. Yes, it's beautiful. It's remarkably beautiful. And yes, there's the harbor and the water and the mountains and the lakes and so much and so many activities, but it's community. And when I work around the world, I want to come back here because we're a group of people that talk to one another and value one another and listen to one another without we listen to people that are different than we are and welcome them into our lives. That is so needed in our present life. So it's that aspect of community here, and these are some of the many who have helped me to create this life of my work. In the upper left-hand corner was a man, Edward Crowther, who really encouraged me to write this book. He died after I'd written the first draft. But the rest are many of you who live in this community who are so valuable to me. And there are others, including my men's group, who didn't wish to be singled out tonight, but you are core to my life and to my choices and to my perceptions and to my learning to listen. I was raised in a very different environment on the West Coast in the mountains of California at the Thatcher School. I was born and raised in the dormitory that you're seeing in the lower picture, and in the right side of that dormitory there were 2 faculty apartments, and we were in the lower one. And we ate all our meals with the students. 20 meals a week was mandatory that the family ate with the students. And it taught me also about community, because all of the faculty and all of the children and all of the students, we ate together, and they were always in our homes. So Thatcher was unusual in that it was a school in which the primary sports activity was horses, and every student owned a horse. Every student had a horse. The mountains where there were 2 million acres of national forest on the border of our property, and my father was head of the horse program. So I was raised on a horse. I could ride before I could walk. My brother, I'm the youngest, my older brother and sister that was part of their lives, and my father was a competitive horseman that was quite well known for it, and taught all those students about riding. But I also grew up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where I just came back from our family centennial of 100 years there. My grandfather, who was a chocolate maker, my great-grandfather were chocolate makers. When they sold the chocolate business in 1925, my grandfather bought a ranch in Jackson Hole for $1 an acre. My parents were very much both cowboy people. How do you say that? On the left, my father and my mother, when they were first married, and there in front of our barn, not long before they both died. But I was raised in a sense of community there in Jackson Hole, as well as in Ojai, California, where it was such a part of my life. That's why it's so important for me to be here with you tonight. But also, I have an unusual background in that my mother was born and raised in Korea. My grandparents, my mother's parents, were born and raised in Korea. And my great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather, was the first Western educator in Korea and the first allowed in Korea. It was a hermit kingdom. My mother spoke Korean, Japanese, English, and then Mandarin fluently. My father was in the Chinese army in the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek, and he spoke Mandarin fluently. Certainly those influences went into my choice to work in another part of the world. It was very seminal to how we identified ourselves. But when I was a little boy, and through until the late 90s, one of our neighbors was Beatrice Wood, and Beatrice Wood was an American artist who was considered one of the founders of the Dada movement of art. I began to work for her when I was 17, 18, and she just absolutely, I was spellbound by her. And Beatrice here is shown on your left with Marcel Duchamp, who was her lover back in the teens and early 20s, and on the right with Jiddu Krishnamurti, who was a famous Indian philosopher and who also lived as a neighbor of ours, just both of them both Beatrice and Krishnamurti lived within a quarter mile of our house. So both had influences upon me, and that's why I'm explaining it, why I'm showing it to you. But Beatrice became a well-known artist in America, a ceramic artist, and her works are in museums throughout the States and the United and around the world. And she had been to India twice and had found the Indian arts and the people to be fascinating. When I was working with her and for her in her studio and in her garden, that's when I first became besotted with gardens, Beatrice invited me to go to India with her. When I was just 19, I met one of her friends, Rukmini Devi Arundale. Rukmini is known today by all Indians, and was known then. She was a friend of Beatrice's, and she invited me too to come to India as her guest. So I went to the University of Denver to study for my trip. I went, it was going to be a year later, so this was my sophomore year. I turned from a poor student into a straight A student by proposing and becoming the only one at my university as an interdepartmental major in these departments. So I studied South Asia through these departments, and I just loved it. I had been a poor student before that because my brain was all over the board. I'm really a lateral thinker, not a linear thinker. And suddenly, through having one subcontinent that was so diverse, I could study it from all these points of view, and it was just riveting to me, fascinating, and that's why I turned into a good student. And so I decided that I would go overland by myself, by local transport from Paris to India. And there were no books on that overland journey. And so the only way that I could learn was by old copies of National Geographic from the 1890s, the early 1910s, the 1920s and 30s, where there were articles about the cultures through which I was going to travel. And then I left, I was still just 19, to fly with a charter plane to Paris, and I went overland by local transport, 9,000 miles, by myself, by local train and local bus, and entered India on my 20th birthday. This is with my mother. This is my backpack and my case that had some valuables in it at Los Angeles International Airport when she took me to leave. And I have this map on its side so you can kind of understand the way if you look in the upper left-hand corner, that's the way it should look. But I wanted you to kind of see where I was coming from Paris, I went to Munich to visit, I'd had an exchange student brother, and then by train, really poor quality train, all the way to Istanbul, and then by local bus and local train through Turkey, which I loved Turkey. And I had, as part of my classes, studied Islamic history and culture and art as a preparation for understanding Islamic culture's influence on India, which is very strong. And so I loved Istanbul. And then I went on by local train and local bus across Turkey. And one of my destinations was Cappadocia, which some of you may know, may have been there. But it was just fascinating to me. There was not much tourism then. There were a few other foreigners there. It's homes that are built, carved out of pumice-like stone and have been lived in since 2000 BC. There were, it's just history built there. And when I was there for several days, I joined with a group of other foreigners who were there also on very low budget. My budget was $2 a day for all my expenses. And so we joined together our resources and rented a taxi for the day to go and see these different extraordinary communities. And while we were driving, I wanted to take a picture. I was not a photographer. I am now, but I was not. But I had I took print photography, Pentax, and I wanted to take a picture of some of the cones. And I stopped. I asked the people to stop, and there was a vineyard there, and the light was just wrong. So I walked into the vineyard to see to try to take these pictures, right, from a better light, and came across a little a stone church that was built into one of the cones with Byzantine frescoes on it of the 14th century. And that plate with the loaf of bread cut with the farmer right there. I mean, he had gone out. He was in the fields of his vineyards. But I was just floored. And these paintings had never been documented, and still may not be, I'm not sure. But that's the kind of adventures I was having. And my book is filled with those adventures and the ways in which I learned to explore the world, and I find people to be good everywhere, to be kind everywhere. If I go with a sense of trust and that I will not invade their culture or look down upon them, they will open their doors to me. This is in Western Turkey. That's an interesting story, but I'm not going to tell it tonight. A bus over the mountains by Mount Ararat that was quite an adventure, and in through Iran and across Iran and into Afghanistan. Now this is Herat, Afghanistan in 1971, before the Russian invasion, before the American bombings. This culture does not exist anymore. So these are photographs of a city, Herat, that was bombed out of recognition by subsequent forces over a period of years. But this is what it was like in 1971. I was not a good photographer, but it is a record, and it's a rare record of what it was then. They were dirt streets, men in turbans, women in total veils, camels, horse-drawn buggies, very, very few cars. And it was fascinating. And I went across Afghanistan and over the Khyber Pass and down into Pakistan just before war was declared with India. So that was 1971. I crossed over in late October. Wherever I went in Pakistan, there were camouflaged tanks and anti-aircraft missiles, and there were signs like this, "Crush India," and there were troops along the borders everywhere marching, and I had to get across as soon as I could. And so I began my book with this, and it came to me. I wasn't planning to write my memoir. I didn't want to write it. People had been encouraging me for years, and my work is about other people. It's about trying to give them voice. But suddenly this came to me, and it's pretty much verbatim as I wrote it in the middle of the night. I pedaled a bicycle rickshaw into India on my 20th birthday. An old man, the vehicle's usual driver, grinned broadly as he held my pack on the seat behind me. I had arrived by local bus from the ancient capital city of Lahore. It was 1971, on the brink of India's last war with Pakistan, my first time in South Asia. To prepare for imminent battle, the two nations had closed all the usual land borders between them. Armaments and troops in full combat readiness, anti-aircraft missiles and tanks covered with netted camouflage thronged both sides of the road. Only this one lonely outpost provided access to the permitted few. Once the guards carefully verified my passport and visa, I walked across the border alone and found no buses or taxis to take me further, only that sole rickety rickshaw. I did not wish to trudge the 8 kilometers into the nearest small town carrying my heavy pack, but I could not imagine allowing that spindly rickshawwala to propel me there. My solution to this dilemma was a novel negotiation and reversal of roles. So began a lifetime of adventures in India. During the past 52 years, it's now 54 years, but when I wrote this, 52 years, I have explored India by rickshaw, bicycle, camel, bullock cart, horse-drawn buggy, elephant, tuk-tuk, scooter, motorcycle, car, bus, plane, boat, and on foot. I have visited almost all of the subcontinent's districts, painstakingly documenting their cultures and arts. I have genuinely felt the pulse of the country. Although crises, phenomenal inequities, and injustices in India have also affected my life, I deeply love this nation and its people. So I don't have a picture of that rickshaw driver, so I pulled this one. But when I got across the border, there were signs everywhere saying, "Crush Pakistan." And I took a bus from the first little town to the city of Amritsar. That was my 20th birthday. And this was on that bus. And out the window, I saw this house with the wall painting and the carved lions, tigers there, that was actually prophetic of what I would spend a lot of my life documenting, which you'll see in the future. But I ended up on that same day, on my 20th birthday, at the Golden Temple. That's the spiritual center of the Sikh people, the Sikh religion, an egalitarian religion where men and women are equals. And I spent my 20th birthday night in the Golden Temple, where they worship the Holy Granth, the Word of God as they perceive it, and they worship the book as God, not as the Word of God per se, but as God incarnate within that book. And so I was in a balcony above the central place where they were reading the book out loud and chanting it, and I watched thousands and thousands of devotees filter in and pass and pray. And it was a remarkable introduction to my 20s. And while I was up there, I saw these paintings, these murals that I thought were just magnificent. Now remember, I had studied Indian art, and I knew quite a bit about it, as much as a 20-year-old could, but I just found these paintings to be magnificent, and I wanted a record of them. But I couldn't take photographs in the temple. That was allowed. No one ever had taken. There were no postcards. So I tracked down, and this was my first day in India, or my second day in India. I tracked down the man in the center there, G.S. Sohan Singh, who was the son of the last man to paint those frescoes. And so we became friends, and he invited me in. And that was the way that my life works. It's being open to situations and looking for them and then allowing them to evolve. So I took a train from Amritsar down to Delhi. It was a third-class train. Remember, my budget was $2 a day. I only spent $1 a day. And it was a crowded, kind of difficult existence to get down to Delhi. And when I was there, I met Beatrice. But through Beatrice, I met, that's me, on about my fourth day in India, in Delhi. I met Kamala Devi Chattopadhyaya. And Kamala Devi is known also by all Indians. She was, in some ways, the right hand of Mahatma Gandhi. She was imprisoned by the British for 5 years, 1 year in total isolation. What do you call that? Solitary confinement. And she's the one that stood up against Gandhi, because Gandhi was a bit of a misogynist and insisted that women be represented equally in India's constitution and in the future. Whether they are or aren't can be discussed for hours, but that was her insistence. And after Indian independence in 1947, it was Kamala Devi who founded all of its crafts cooperatives, or most of its crafts cooperatives throughout the country. And that's where I came in. So I was interested in craftsmanship and folk art. I love things that are made by hand. I love things that reflect the hands of the person that made them and then are used over a period of time. It's something that's always floated my boat since I was a little boy. But these are pictures of Kamala Devi when she was back in the day before Indian independence, when she was fighting against the British. And then after she helped develop these crafts cooperatives, which were in every district in India. So when I went to Kamala Devi and I met her on about my fourth day in India, and I told her what I wanted to do, which was documented in craftsmanship, she said, come back tomorrow and bring a map, and show me where you're going to go. And so I had this old National Geographic map in my pack that was all folded and creased and had little tears in it. And I drew a map around, a line around where I wanted to go with little circles around the cities or places that I most wanted to visit. And she made a few changes to that map. And then this great woman wrote more than 60 individuals who had also founded the crafts movement, many of whom had also fought the British and been jailed by them, to say, take care of this boy. Now who has been given that kind of gift? I mean, and was I deserving? No, I wasn't. The only way that I can understand it is that I was open and I was willing and I was interested and I didn't come in with judgment and I listened. And I think that is core to what I do. So with Beatrice, we flew down to South India, to Madras, which if you look on this map of India on the left is now called Chennai, but it was Madras down on the lower left hand of, to you it's the lower right hand part of the peninsula, the east. And Rukmini met me there and gave me a place to stay with her at her school. Rukmini had been a very well-known and highly revered dancer back in the late 1920s and early 30s, and then through the 40s, and after Indian independence, founded the first school of classical Indian dance and music in India. The British had outlawed classical Indian dance, and she fought the British to bring it back in. And is there something showing up there? I don't know quite how to do that. Good. And so Rukmini had found this school called Kalakshetra, is in Chennai in Madras, to encourage the teaching of dance, classical dance and classical music. It was a little bit like being at the Royal Ballet School or the Kirov Ballet School, as well as being at a center of, say, the Juilliard, because the music was so fine as well. And what a place for learning. And Helene Hai and I returned to Kalakshetra years later and lived on campus for 4 years. But this was what the campus was like. And Helene came for 2 weeks in December 1971. I was so lonely. And she came, and I was so impressed by her willingness to come across the country to meet me that I proposed, and we actually sort of secretly married each other back in 1971 in Madras. And that was when the war broke out. The war broke out the day that she flew into India. She was unaware of it. That's another story. She didn't realize that there was a war. They were bombing Bombay Airport, and she flew through Bombay Airport. We weren't sure if she would make it. That's a whole story in and of itself, but she did. She was there for the 2 weeks. The war only lasted 13 days, and then she was able to fly back. It was pretty amazing. During my time in Tamil Nadu, that state where Madras is the capital, Chennai is the capital, I began doing field research in clay sculptures that are given to the gods and placed under sacred trees with the belief that the horses would, the gods would ride the horses around and protect the village. And I found that concept so charming, and there was no documentation of it, that I began documenting it. I also began documenting the women who painted the ground in front of their front doors. You'll have seen that there's a painting in front of our front door that was made for me by a woman in Chennai, in Madras, for this event. But the women in front of, in every household of Tamil Nadu at that time, and more than 1 million households, would make sacred designs that were ephemeral, would last an hour or two, and then would be walked over, driven over, destroyed, blown away, and life goes on, and then they make another one the next morning before dawn. And I was so impressed by that level of creativity, the fact also that they prided themselves in never repeating a design, that I stored it away. I took a few photographs. I also began documenting craftsmanship with weaving, with basket making, with wood carving, with brass making and bronze casting, and all different sorts of facets that the Friends of Kamala Devi helped me to get access to, and which I began my lifetime documentation around the country as I went. And everywhere I went, I stayed with families that Kamala Devi or Rukmini Devi put me up with, so I didn't stay in hotels. And what an honor, what a treasure to be given that level of hospitality at just 20. Of course I do what I do. Of course I've been transformed. Of course I am a person of community. So I began to try to understand the complexity of Hinduism and temples. This is the largest temple to the goddess in the world in Tamil Nadu. These snake figures, which are for fertility, are placed under sacred trees. I love trees, and I just find the quality, the concept that a tree would be viewed as an aspect of divinity quite wonderful. And so I began documenting that. And as I went up the coast, I kept meeting people who would mentor me, who would explain to me about aspects that they found being left behind, that were being destroyed, that were being in the interest of being a contemporary, modern, forward-looking country. People were letting their traditions go. And so that's one of the reasons that I was given such encouragement in my life, was because there were so few people doing that. And this man, Wakani, spent 2 weeks teaching me about textiles, about embroidery and applique, and the stitchery, the stitches made, the people that made them, the kinds of symbols, why they were made, how they were used. Whoa, you know? And it was just fascinating. So after my trip was over, I had gone 9,000 miles through 17 countries for 8 months in 239 days for a total expense of $2,400, only spent $960 on myself, $1,540 spent on crafts and art. I kept a third, I gave a third away, and I sold a third, which paid for my last 2 years of college. So I thought that I would spend my life maybe doing that, going to India, buying art, finding people that were interested in it. A lot of the art I sold was to museums because it was so unusual. And I thought that's what I'd do. And then I came back. On the right is on the left is the day I returned to Helene. And a year and a half later, we were married, where Beatrice Wood was our maid of honor. It was 1973. We were married outside. I wore a top hat. Helene designed and made her dress by hand, but you can see she wore a sari as her going away outfit. And then a year, or about 9 months later, we repeated the same trip that I had done overland by local transport, living a little bit better, but as if you read the book, you'll understand, I was so blind. We were blind to who we really were. You know, we were so young, 23, and we just weren't mature enough to really understand what floated each other's boats, and we wanted to do this together. We romanticized it, and it almost destroyed us. We went back to India. We traveled through India. Went initially back to the Golden Temple, where I purchased the paintings that G.S. Sohan Singh had showed me that his father had made, that had been the mock-ups for the interior frescoes of the Golden Temple. These are some of them. I just gave these back to India, so they're now permanently in India. And I began collecting textiles wholesale. I understand textiles. I have a great feel for them. The embroideries, the costumes, the things that are made by people for their own use, often dowry pieces. And I was fascinated by it and came back to the States and realized I really can't be a dealer. I had this large collection, and I realized it just doesn't work for me. I have nothing against buying and selling art. It's fine. But I can give things away without any problem. That's no problem at all. But selling it, putting a price on it, was hard for me. But these are some of the things that Helene and I purchased when we were together on that trip overland. And when we were in India, India had, and you'll read about this in the book, a very harsh effect on Helene, and she ended up in a hospital in Mumbai, this hospital, Breach Candy, with lung surgery. And when the lung surgery was going on, 8 hours later, the surgeon, who was the finest in India, came out and told me she would not survive. So our life has had some hardships, and we've rebounded. We're still alive. She's alive. Pardon me? What? You did survive, yes. Yeah, I'm so glad. And we went back to Denver. The house on the right of the screen is where we lived for the final years of my undergraduate degree in cross-cultural study and Indian studies. And then one of my professors, a professor of history, who was just a fabulous teacher, had gone to the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and I applied to go there for my PhD. I actually skipped. I don't have an MA. I have a BA and a PhD. I have what's called MPhil in Britain, but I just took the courses, and then I was doing independent research. So we lived in London for 3.5 years in this house, a terraced house, a row house, in the north of London. And I spent a lot of my years in London at the Victoria and Albert Museum with their textile collection, which I thought that I would do, examining the 60,000 pieces of Indian textiles that had been collected before Indian independence, which was a tremendous treat. So I have a certain amount of knowledge of Indian textiles. Whoops. And we also spent lots of time at Portobello Market on the day that it was open to dealers, the day before it was open to the regular market, to the regular people. All of it was training my eye to open to see and to notice and to understand, to be open to. And then because that trip had been so disastrous, where Helene almost died, in our immaturity, I thought it would be best to have an air-conditioned car, because that seemed to be a problem for her. And the only air-conditioning car I could find was this big Ford, and the air conditioning didn't work. And this driver, who was really awful, a total ass, and who we hired this car for 4 months to go on a circle tour of India, and he hated all of India except Delhi and parts of Rajasthan. And he made it known how he was really awful to the people that we met, which was kind of antithetical to what I was trying to do, was trying to be open. And then this awful big car. If you read the preface of my book by Dr. Shashi Tharoor, he talks about me in the big white car. Anyway, it began my survey of Indian traditional cultures. And my work is not to try to preserve traditional cultures in order that they don't change, but it's in order to understand the wisdom of traditional cultures, that wisdom might be able to be used for future in ways that, there's thousands of years of tradition there. We don't want to throw it out, throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I began looking at different kinds of communities in different environments, the way that houses were laid out, the ways that they were built, the structure of them, the kinds of roofing, the kinds of walls, the ways in which people inhabited them. Where did they live? What were the animals part of the house? Was there a barn that was separate? And India is a very complex culture. So I began that year, and in subsequent years, traveling to virtually every district in India, because no one had done that. And what I realized was it needed to be done. There needed to be a record. And as I began to do that, I took more and more photographs, and my photography improved. And it was trying to understand ways of, could be craftsmanship, but it's also farming techniques and irrigation techniques, and the ways in which crops and whatever their products are vary according to climate and elevation and where they live and the amount of rainfall, etc. So that's what I worked with, what I began to try to understand and to try to feel the pulse of the people. And all this time, I'm trying to listen to people. Let people tell me who they are. Who do they think they are? Because what I found in most books published about India outside of India is that they were foreigners going in with a preconceived notion, basing their work upon other foreigners who'd written about the culture, and which they just kept repeating the same mistakes. But what do the people want to be known as? What are their wisdoms? Who are they? And can we listen? Can we listen? And for me, it still is all about community. It's about the relationships between mothers and children, the ways in which children are taught, the relationships between women, because in India, women are key to understanding the culture. And the more I worked in India, the more I was invited into homes, the more I recognized how strong these women are and how little that is understood outside of India. And so I also continued to collect crafts and folk art. These were all going to be melted down and refashioned into other things. And so I bought them from slag heaps, from gunny sacks filled with grimy old brass, and bought them for 25 rupees a kilo at a time when, $3, it was about $3. 25 rupees was about $3, and a kilo was 2.2 pounds. And for example, in the upper right-hand corner, all three of those would be less than $3, right? So they really cost nothing. And I was I've given all these away to museums, but I was just fascinated by the craftsmanship and how it was used and what it meant, how did it fit into people's homes. This is my home, our home, and our third floor in our London house, and some of the textiles and sculptures, etc., that we had collected. No longer have any of them, but we did at that point. Having been in London for 3.5 years, we went down to Cornwall in order for me to write my doctoral dissertation, to rent a house, but we fell in love with a 17th century thatched cottage and ended up purchasing it. We had owned our house in London. We sold that more or less for an equal trade, and we lived in Cornwall for 4 years. And I immersed myself in Cornwall. And that's, those of you that know that we have an unusual garden, that's where I learned the gardening. It was living in Cornwall and in England. It was that taught me an immeasurable amount. And right there in the second row, you don't want to be noticed, but there are people in this room, I'll just say, that have been so influential in my greater understanding of gardening and landscaping. And they matter a great deal to me. So while we lived in Cornwall, I had my first exhibition that was of Indian textiles. These are architectural pieces. You see those really large applique that top one would fit into the eaves of a roof with the beams cut out to fit right in there. You know, they're just fascinating textiles, fascinating stuff. So this was my first exhibition with some of the sculptures that I'd rescued from being destroyed. I didn't say that most of these textiles I also rescued because they were being cut up and made into little animals that were sold at Pier 1 and other Western cultures. So that one man, Wakani, that I showed you on my first trip was the one that taught me so much about textiles, was helping me to understand the need to rescue them. So then we came to Camden. So we were 4 years in Cornwall, 3.5 years in London, and we really were tired of being expatriates, and we wanted to move back to the States, and we looked for some place that had a quality of Cornwall, which we dearly love, and that was Camden, and Mid-Coast Maine. And of course, it's very different as well, but there are qualities about it that are similar, including it being largely granite, both Cornwall and Maine. And while I was here, I was given the contract to write my first book, which was Village India. So I did a survey of 14 Indian states, and they were my photographs. It was a really fine publisher. The book is downstairs if you want to see it. It's been long out of print, as are most of my books. But it's by Abrams in New York, which was a fine publisher. But I was so discouraged by the photography that I found out about the Maine Photographic Workshops. These are pictures by David Lyman. They're not mine, and I've stolen them. But from the day I took them off the web, I began to take master classes here in Rockport in photography. And I had an eye, and I had a little bit of skill, but not much. And I learned a lot here. And for that, will always be eternally grateful. And so I decided for my doctoral dissertation that I would do a survey of 14 Indian states and the terracotta art, the ephemeral art. I'm fascinated by ephemerality, for things that are made like those clay horses that I showed you, that are made for one moment only and then allowed to dissolve and go back to the earth. So I studied the potter's art, from the making, throwing of pots, to the firing of pots in the upper right-hand corner, to the decorating of pots, to the marketing of them, of vessels, to sacred vessels that are like this, used to hold a sacred plant. To these. So that was that first. This is going back again to where those terracotta horses were that I described in my first trip. On the far right are the largest clay sculptures ever made, are known about in the history of mankind. And I discovered them. Nobody knew that they existed. Everybody thought they were stucco. They're not. They're clay, they're hollow, and they're fired on the spot. And they're 17 feet high. They're gigantic and made in one piece. So, it's also been a life of unfolding discovery, constant discovery. And I learned that there are terracotta sculptures made and placed under sacred trees in communities everywhere in India, in every district. And nobody had thought to put it together because the people of one subculture didn't recognize what was happening in the other culture. And so they just thought it was theirs alone. And so I began documenting that, from the making to the using to the placing in the shrines to the dissolving back to nature, back to the earth. And this was my doctoral dissertation that became a book. My photography was better by this time. And while I was traveling and doing that, I continued to document women's art and women's ephemeral art. Again, I'm very interested in ephemerality. So these, remember I said earlier, these columns that are put outside the front doors of homes every day of the year are really quite magnificent. And I just was, this is done freehand by this woman before dawn. And tomorrow, the next day, she won't do the same thing. She'll do a completely different design. And every day thereafter for the rest of her life. And it goes on for as many generations as we can record. Wow, how is that possible? But I also then that went into my third book, which was Painted Prayers, commissioned by Rizzoli in New York. That they also did it in a French edition and a German edition. And I went around the country and I documented different forms of ephemeral art made by women as part of their daily or seasonal routines. And so this is in the state of Kerala, which is also in southwestern India, or up on the eastern coast of India in the state of what is now called Odisha, was called Orissa when I was working there, where in the mud adobe type homes, the women would resurface their earlier paintings with a new mixture of mud mixed with cow dung. Cow dung gives it an adhesive quality that keeps it from flaking, and then repainting using a brush that she's made herself from a stick. And it's using rice flour that they harvest themselves, and it goes on clear and it dries white. And this home is one house, 1 week apart, same house, same, and look, they don't repeat a design. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's just amazing. And so that's what my book, Painted Prayers, was about. This is in northwestern India, where the women do both the ground and their walls, the ground with very sacred designs that are carefully proscribed, while as the walls are more genre decoration, which are just showing scenes of daily life or things that have affected them. For example, there's a Vespa scooter there in the center one. And the interior of their homes, again, none of this had been documented. The interior homes of their homes are done in mud bas-relief. When the house walls are fresh, the mud walls are fresh. I mean, it's just so beautiful. And in far western India, the women, because it's so dry, there's less than 5 inches of rain per year there on the border of Pakistan. The men are camel herders, and the women use just once each year for the Diwali festival, which is in October, November, will resurface their stone walls with cow dung and then paint these geometric designs, which are traditional, again, traditional. And their interiors are these kinds of mud bas-relief interiors. So this is the city of Jodhpur. It's a part of the city of Jodhpur. When I first went there in 1972, it was white. And then one woman mixed in too much bluing with her whitewash, and she loved the effect, and so she made her house blue. And the neighbors were jealous, and so they made their house blue. And then it spread till the whole part of the city was blue. And it was fascinating, just fascinating. And now it's returning to white. But this is that blue city made for Diwali. And then in Gujarat, where women who were previously nomadic now live in mud houses, do these mud bas-relief decorations that they inlay with mirrors and colored glass, so that, for example, on the far right side, this is a storage bin, and the house has no electricity, and those electric light bulbs are purely for decoration. So, doing all this work, I was contacted by the Smithsonian, the new museum of, it's now called, they changed the name, the National Museum of Asian Art, and the Sackler Gallery invited me to have a Painted Prayers exhibition. So I had an exhibition there that they curated that was filled with my photographs. You can see some of them were quite large. Connecticut Avenue, where one of my photographs was on every corner and backlit at night. It was quite exciting, one of the exciting points of my life. And then I was asked by the director of now the National Museum of Asian Art, if I would be willing to curate an exhibition about practical Hinduism. So I returned to India and I began to document. Remember, I'd stayed in, by this point, hundreds and hundreds of homes, and I had witnessed the rituals of daily life, where women are the primary agents for worship for the family and for care and caretaking of the family. And so I returned to India and began to document different kinds of shrines and temples, or for example, these bells, which are God. It's not a question, it's a symbolic of God, but the word Om is considered to be God, not an aspect of God. So the use of fire, the use of offerings to deities, the dressing of images. So most of the images that we see in museums that are Hindu are devoid of their dress and their adornment and the flowers, but they would never be seen in that way by Indians in worship. They're always dressed and adorned. And so it was documenting that. And Hinduism is a religion of personal devotion, of individuality, of not of congregation, not of sermons, but of the ways in which people choose to approach the divine for themselves. And ephemerality, again, which I'm so fascinated by. So these images of the goddess Durga are made in the city of Calcutta, but they're done in other parts of India too, made and worshipped out of clay for 8 days in a temporary shrine, and then carried to the edge of the river and thrown in and allowed to dissolve back into the river. I'm fascinated by that whole concept of recycling, reworking something made yet again and again and again. So this was the exhibition I did. It was supposed to be open for 6 months, but because of popular demand, it was open for 4 years. They clocked in 750,000 visitors. So I needed to do a book to go with it, and I created a traveling exhibition as well. But it was in agreement with the museum. I would only show them if they allowed me to show them the way that they're meant to be seen. And so they were dressed and adorned, the sculptures that otherwise would be on a pedestal, devoid of that, and in context, or say the Sacred Tree Shrine. And that show went to New York in another form, one that I had curated and designed, and went to the American Museum of Natural History. I worked with them for 3 years. I was given 100 staff members. It was just amazing. They were all unionized, so one person could lift the book, but the next person had to take it away, and the next person had to put it down, It was one of those things, and it was just amazing. And the only reason that they agreed, I insisted. I'd been to the Museum of Natural History when I was a little boy, and I'd loved their dioramas, and I said, I need to have a banyan tree. I'll do the show if you create for me a banyan tree, which they did right there. And so then we used, remember I showed you those little snake figures that I documented on my first trip. And so I found some in their reserve collections, and we dressed and adorned them, and I went up the tree and I tied things to the lateral leaves, etc. It was just fascinating, lateral limbs. And there were a set of interactive shrines where the museum viewer could go and open a shrine and see into it, and perhaps have a better understanding of what the personal nature of Hinduism was. So this was the exhibition at the Museum of Natural History that, ironically, and it was very accepted by the Hindu Indian community of the greater New York area, and ironically, and this is the book, it opened on the 8th of September 2001, and on the Saturday, and on the Monday all museums are closed, and on the Tuesday was my big press conference where I was being featured by Time and Newsweek, and that was 9/11, and my life was none of us have been the same again after 9/11, and we are now a divisive world, a suspicious country, a country that no longer welcomes people in. We've lost some of our sense of community. That's why our community here is all the more important, where we accept people and listen to people and are interested in people. So what was I going to do? My whole career, the American Museum of Natural History was going to travel it to 7 more museums. My book that was published by Yale University Press, they did 60,000 copies in full color, and they were remaindered within a short period of time. And so Rob Brown from the Center for Maine Contemporary Art, just almost next door, gave me carte blanche to create an exhibition. That's the last thing before today that I've been able to do for our community. Now Joe Ryan helped me to create these pop-up exhibitions and the things that are outside. But this was a great amount of fun. And it was in 2003, and some of you were there and remember what it was like. And it was just really pushing the envelope of how I might be able to exhibit things. After doing that, I then realized, well, what have I done that was most important for me? What was most important? And Painted Prayers, really, that book on women's art and identity, was really what floated my boat. So I returned to India over a period of years and I interviewed more than 1,000 women and asked for their stories. Tell me what you want. Tell me who you are. How do you relate to your husband, to your family, to your children, to your mother-in-law? Who are you? And then I realized that it would do a disservice if I were just to make generalizations about the women of India. And here I am, a white American male. I mean, there's a large part of my book that talks about that. You know, who am I and what do I see through the privileged eyes of being a white American male? And I've tried to unpack that. Chapter 16 is about that. But at any rate, I returned to India and I decided that I would choose 20 women from as many different facets of Indian society as I could and tell their stories and let those stories reflect the broader story. And I used art as the means of collecting them together. So these are the 20 women, and each has her own story told. And they're very different, from elderly to very young, from wealthy to outcast and desperately poor, from people living in slums to those living in remote villages. It was really trying to listen to them. Listen, tell me your story. Who are you? Who do you want to be known? What do you want to be known for? And one of those stories was Sonabai. And Sonabai was the most remarkable woman who married when she was a young woman, a young 16-year-old, a man many years her elder, a widower, who they built a home on the outside of their village. Typical of the kind of architecture of that community, it had no windows, it had an interior courtyard, and it had one door. And after they'd finished the house, and it was way outside the community, which is rare in India, he closed that door. And he did not allow her outside for 15 years, did not allow anyone inside. They had a child. She wanted to give her child toys, so this is the home. So she used clay from the edge of her well, and she made clay sculptures, toys to give him. She'd never had any training whatsoever, but she was good at it, and she loved it, so she began to apply them to her mud walls. And she invented, as far as she was concerned, the concept of lattice work, which would pull the wind down into her very hot house by using strips of bamboo from the bamboo that they'd used to build the house that was left over. And then she painted the figures. And this is the interior of her home. Now, if you and I were in isolation for 15 years and not allowed to see anyone except our one child and my, the husband, we might express ourselves creatively, but it might be dark. But Sonabai created something that was expressive of extraordinary beauty and whimsy, and it is unlike any art in India's 4,000 years of recorded history. It's different. It's her own expression. And that, for me, became a symbol that I turned into a book, and I turned into a film that got 5 Best Film Awards in international film festivals, and into a big exhibition that was about, and this exhibition has moved. So I designed the show with a lot of help. Everything is with help. It's all about community. You know, we all do things together. None of us are single. We share and learn and help and open ourselves to others, and they help us create our vision. So some of the people here helped me with this. And this was the exhibition about Sonabai and her work. And it has traveled, and I'm thrilled. And then I used some of the technology that I created for the CMCA exhibition almost next door of printing on chiffon. And this was about the dance that she made. Sonabai had made these figures about dance. And so she brought so much life inside. To me, that is her story. Her story is something that's so relevant because we are told in our world that there's no hope for us. We've buried ourselves. We've destroyed our environment. We've destroyed our relationships. We're at each other's throats. And what Sonabai taught me is that there's infinite amount of human creativity. And we can make solutions. We can find ways to reinvent ourselves. We can be transformed and transform the world through our efforts. So finally, and I'm at the end, I have 200, so what I didn't say is that a museum in Delhi is taking the entire Sonabai exhibition and putting it on permanent display. So it'll be part of... In the last 54 years, I have 250,000 edited images of India. That's a lot. I've also, that same organization in Delhi is taking all of these images and digitizing them. I do not want copyright. I do not care. They belong to the Indian people. But the value of them was brought home to me on this last trip when I was in India in January, and this book was released in India in January. And I was at a book festival in Hyderabad, or just outside Hyderabad, in this community. And this is literally, I took this from the book festival. And I just was amazed. It was like being in downtown Dubai. You know, I'm in India. And when I left, I looked up the coordinates, and I realized that this is exactly where that was. So this was this. And my photographs, those 250,000 photographs, are the only records of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of communities around the subcontinent, because nobody was photographing back in the 70s. So that's perhaps the value of my work, and for which I'm very glad. So then finally, we are just at the end, and when there is going to be a Q&A, and when we've done, and if people wish to come downstairs, I will be signing books down there, but remember, I've talked about ephemerality throughout this, and I studied the making of clay sculptures, clay sculptures, but clay vessels. And the idea of India, when I would travel in India for my first 25 or 30 years, wherever I went, I would get chai served in a clay cup like this in the bottom. And when you'd finished your chai, you might have 2 or 3 cups in that same little 3-ounce vessel. But when you'd finished with it, you'd throw it on the ground and snap it under your foot, or you'd throw it onto the railway track and the train would come along and it would take it back to the earth. It was that same thing of, remember, the goddess Durga being worshipped for 8 days and then being thrown into the river where she dissolves back into the earth. It's that quality of, it gave, when I wrote my doctoral dissertation, it gave jobs to more than 1 million potters. But of course now, they're plastic vessels that are used. So we're going to go downstairs, those that wish to, and I have a Indian clay terracotta cup for each person, and there is D. Patel has made true Indian chai, which is chai made with caffeinated tea and milk and sweet that you can have, or alternatively, I've persuaded her to make decaffeinated chai with oat milk and agave syrup because it's late at night. And if you don't want either of those, there's also the ubiquitous Indian beverage in the heat, which is what's called a nimbo soda or a fresh lime soda. And that is also sweetened with agave syrup. And there are cups. So you can have a terracotta cup, and then she has made little Indian sweets. Remember, today is the festival of Ganesha. So there are little round sweets which are Ganesha's favorite sweet. They're called ladus. And there are little, I just went blank, little cashew sweets that she's made. And then there are, if you want, spinach pakoras. And they will be served in the ubiquitous Indian leaf bowls that are made from the sal plant, the sal leaves, and they are used everywhere in India for festivals and weddings, or they were. But of course now they're being replaced by other things. So this is how I've always eaten in India. So we're going to take questions now for a few minutes and go downstairs in about 15 or 20. Anybody that needs to, the restrooms are downstairs. If you're like me, you may need to go more often than you used to. But before that, so I knew this was coming 3 weeks ago. I contacted this woman, Kamalavati, in Chennai, in Madras, and she made this column for us. And I had it printed here at Warner Graphics, which is outside on the street there. Is transformed by India. So thank you. I have an unusual website. You're welcome to look at it. Lots of thousands of images on it. The book also has photographs that go with each chapter that are in the website. And are there any questions? I know there's going to be a roving mic, so maybe we can have house lights. Thank you. Any questions over there? For some reason, I have a quality that disarms people. I always have. And people are not protective around me. I don't come in with judgment. I do come in with openness. I don't threaten. I never objectify women. And men are not protective around me, where they might be protective to men from any other Indian community coming into their area. So I just simply respect people. And I'm there, and people open to me. So I'm allowed in homes with women behind the veil many times, often, in situations where other men would never be allowed. But it's because I'm married to the most wonderful woman in the world, and I just don't carry that with me. I don't carry that quality, whatever it is, that pheromone that would put other men on the defensive. And I listen to people. I ask them who they are. I want to know. And they want to hear, people love to be listened to. People want to tell their stories. It's not hard. It really is not. And there's a quality in India that's just so warm and embracing. People really are kind and hospitable. And yes, I'm a male. And yes, I'm a white American male, and that represents a whole lot in this world. But I am who I am. And I can't help being that. But I can allow people, I can come in without that quality. And the book was extremely well received in India, far more so than I expected. And it was that quality that they said that I don't exotify India, nor do I in any way condescend. I don't feel that we are superior. I don't think we are better. They have so much to offer. And so that's kind of key to, I don't know if that answers your question. Somebody asked me tonight to say, how did the thing happen with the Dalai Lama that he wrote this? And honestly, it was as big a surprise to me as it could have been to anyone. I got a letter from him about the 1st of October in which he said he'd read my manuscript and could he write my foreword. And I wrote back and said, who is this really? and then he wrote back with his signature and on his letterhead, and it was like, oh. and I couldn't stop laughing. I really couldn't stop. He's about joy, his book Joy, but he's about joy. And it was infectious. I couldn't stop laughing for a couple of weeks. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, over here. Yeah, it was a question about the language barrier, and it's a very good one. I work in, India has about 200 major different languages and or dialects which are unintelligible from one to the next. And there's no way I can do that. I have a ability to speak and understand enough Hindi to get along, and I've learned some other languages. When I lived in Tamil Nadu, I picked that up, and when I lived in Orissa, I picked up Odissi. But I can't possibly. So I work through people. I come in with that quality of acceptance and understanding, and I ask someone to help me to understand. And it's amazing. There's always somebody that speaks enough English that if it's English or it's Hindi or whatever, or it's Tamil or it's whatever it is that I need to try to get the avenue in. And of course it takes a little bit more effort to get to try to get into the true story. I do the best I can. Thank you. It has not been printed in other languages. David Perez, who is here and is a close friend and who made my Sonobai film with me, has recorded it, and it should have been released yesterday in Audible and all the other audio platforms, but it was not, but it should be forthcoming soon for those that want to listen to it rather than read it. But no other languages so far. We'll see. Yeah. Beverly. Yes, yes. I think that I tend to be pretty observant, and because I am from outside, it's like if you have somebody from outside, from away, coming here, and they'll see things that we don't see. But it also was that there is such a hierarchy in India. That's one of the reasons I love Mid-Coast Maine, because I don't feel that hierarchy. But we lived in Britain, and there's a tremendous hierarchy there. In India, there's a real hierarchy. So there was an attitude that fine art, what was considered court art, or the art that was patronized by the very wealthy, was the only thing that was viable, and that what was viewed as lesser arts, the arts that were made by just regular men and women, weren't of value. And the people themselves recognized that, if I'm doing a column, I'm doing it for the floor decoration. I'm doing it for the benefit of my family. But most of those women don't see themselves as artists. They are, but they don't have that viewpoint, and they would never sign it. They don't. This woman, Ephemerality, did sign that because she knew I was going to be showing you. But in most cases, it wouldn't occur to them to sign it. It's not about that. And people have asked me over the years, how do they have enough time to do that every day? Because it may take an hour to make one, or half an hour, or 45 minutes. The women say, how could we not do that? This is our one time for our own creativity, our own voice, our own way, before we go and take care of the children and cook the meals and clean the house and go to work. We still do this, and they still do, and it's still wonderful. One more question there? Or two more? Up in the back. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, sir. How long did it take to write the book? Thank you. It's Camillo, isn't it? Yes. Thanks, Camillo. It's a little hard to see you because I'm in the bright light. So Camillo asked me how long it took me to write the book. Well, I wasn't going to write it, and then we were in COVID lockdown, and in June I wrote that first thing I read to you that is about pedaling the bicycle rickshaw into India on my 20th birthday. And I wrote that, and then I realized, I can do this. And of course it was lockdown. So I just wrote. And I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And I had finished it by February. So that was June to February. And then that was back in 1921, February. And, 2021, thank you. Then it took a long time to get to the stage it's in now. And it's taken revisions. I wasn't in any rush. And I was told by a very good friend who had been a publisher not to submit it to any publishers during COVID because they were up against the wall, as many businesses were. And so to wait. So I waited. And luckily I did, because I have had, Beverly asked a question. She was one of the editors. Joan Fopp over there is one of the editors. I've had lots of people help me hone this. And thank God. It's been a community effort. It's all a community effort. And maybe, unless there is somebody that needs to ask another question, we could go down for chai. Is that a good idea? Thank you.